Number 5. The Book of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage. The Book of Abramelin, or more formally, the Book of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage, is an old Jewish magic text that is thought to date back at some point in the 14th or 15th century. Now, it wasn't the initial publication of this book that gave it its notoriety. Instead, it was when it was 19th and 20th century magicians who were in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which is a British secret society dedicated to the practice, research, and upholding of old occult magic ways. But hush hush, you didn't hear that from me. One of the founders of the Golden Dawn, S.L.M. Mathers, created the first ever English translation of the book in the 1890s, drawing from a previously established 17th century French translation. Now, Mathers' translation quickly became the definite magic text of the 19th century, eventually helping inspire Aleister Crowley to inspire his system of magic, the legendary occultist and fixture of one of the best Ozzy Osbourne songs ever. That solo still goes, man. Now, there's all kinds of spells and magic inside this text. Some real highlights include spells on how to conjure somebody and turn them into a donkey, how to summon a monkey to do your bidding, that sounds great, and how to bring forth spirits to fetch you goods. The big key point in this text, however, is an epic, multi-month spanning ritual that, if performed correctly, will allow the sorcerer to commune with their own guardian angel. The book theorizes that everyone has a guardian angel and that they are another part of their essence, a spiritual other half of yourself. The ritual involves, I don't know how to say this politely. You have to, they say you have to get blissfully intimate with your other half. Once the honeymoon period is over, the caster then has to summon up and conquer unredeemed spirits of the infernal regions of hell to conquer them. And then they'll be able to master the spirit domain. That sounds like a lot of irredeemed spirits. I hope my angel might help out a little bit with that. This all sounds very complicated, so all things considered, maybe it's for the best that this one's locked away. Seems like heavy reading, not before bedtime. And if you're looking for more true tales of terror, fake frightening fribs, cursed relics, ancient evils, aliens, cryptids, conspiracies, ghouls, goblins, and pretty much everything spooky you can think of, Top 5 Scary is the place to be. Stay subscribed, but way more importantly, stay scared. Okay, let's keep going. Whole lot more video to get through. Number 4. Book of Soga. The Book of Soga, also known by a more complicated name, the Alderia Siva Soga Vocor, is an occult text that hails back from the 15th century. I'm pretty sure just saying that name out loud in front of the camera, I probably caused a curse on the office, so I'm sorry about that. This text would have been lost to time, just another forgotten cursed manuscript, if it weren't for the obsessive efforts of John Dee, a 16th century polymath who had his hands in just about every field of study. Polymath is a fancy word for a guy who studies just about everything, and Dee practiced chemistry, physics, astronomy, and also the occult. You know, there's always more to learn, right? Mr. Dee was particularly interested in contacting angels to learn the secrets of the universe. And this book contains a litany of recipes for magic spells and all sorts of writings on demonology and astrology, but most importantly, and what caught Mr. Dee's attention, is that the book is said to include the names and genealogies of all of heaven's angels. Dee believed that the book contained an ancient divine message written in a language spoken to by Adam, the true unspoiled word of God. That's a pretty big statement. Now, much like the Voynich manuscript, which I'll mention a little later in the video, so put a pin in that for now, it had 36 cryptic tables that remained undeciphered for centuries. Dee attempted at one point to crack the code with the help of a mystic who convinced Dee that he could channel the angels for him. Dee allegedly was so desperate to unlock the contents of this book that when his mystic told him it was part of the ritual that he be allowed a night with John Dee's wife, he agreed. That's the oldest trick in the book, man. The old "I'll let you talk to angels if I can go out with your wife" gamble. Ugh, can't believe you fell for it. Dee's wife would end up birthing a son, Theodore Dee, the fatherhood of which was disputed, to say the least. John Dee was never able to crack the code in his lifetime and decipher the Book of Soga, and perhaps for the best, as it was said he was warned that man was never meant to uncover those secrets, and that knowledge would end his life. The book is now said to reside in the British Library, although digital copies are available. Read it at your own risk, and if somebody says they can translate it for you, just make sure you really read everything on the fine print in the contract before you sign that, okay? Just looking out for you.
In third place, we have a shadow doll. Among one of the first haunted items items visible to those who visit the Warren Occult Museum is a shadow doll, which boasts bird feathers and a genuine human tooth, and she's just overall terrifying to look at. I'm calling it now, she better join that TV universe one day. For reference, a shadow doll is a statue or deity of sorts that is made specifically for harm to be used at the center of curses. I happen to know the steps for the most common curse, and while I'll leave out a step for safety, I promise I'll elaborate. Now, the caster would first need to take a picture of the doll, write a curse on the back of the photo, and then send it to whoever the curse is aimed for. You know, hopefully you've got their mailing address. The person who receives the picture with the curse will sadly invite that curse into their lives. Oh, almost forgot. The doll is also going to appear in that person's dreams, so enjoy your nightmares, folks. While not too much is known about the origins of this specific doll, it was initially purchased in a secondhand store under the assumption that it was simply, an antique. I've got a couple of old dolls myself, and I'm shuddering to think about what they would do if activated by any kind of curse. Some of them talk enough already. In second place, we have black magic math, which is a concept in theosophy, mysticism, and the paranormal, of a materialized thought form, typically in human form such as an imaginary friend or being that is created through spiritual practice and intense concentration. In simpler English, the masks act as a representation of the practice, which is a form of mysticism that involves creating sentient and autonomous beings separate from oneself. The concept of tulpas and their creation, including the word tulpa, come from a closed Tibetan Buddhist practice, with tulpa being a Tibetan word for a creature of the mind. Tulpas did not become part of Western paranormal lore until around the 1970s, and those who practice have been cited as wearing masks similar to Halloween ones in order to take on the appearance of whatever the mask looks like. If anyone is curious about modern practices and appropriations of tulpamancers, the interweb origins can be traced back to 4chan message boards in 2009, and I'm not going to elaborate on just how awful that sentence was to utter. Oh, it gets worse. The communities gained popularity when adult fans of My Little Pony started discussing tulpas of characters from the Friendship is Magic television series. The fans attempted to use meditation and lucid dreaming techniques to create imaginary friends. Well, I think that about sums that up, don't you? In first place, we have the black lace veil. So after one of their many public lectures, Ed was conversing with a couple that had been in the audience, where the boy introduced himself as Alan and explained that he'd brought his girlfriend Lonnie to the lecture because he suspected that she'd been overtaken by some occult influence. He explained that when his girlfriend became angry, her features would change into something resembling a wolf, and then the voice of a different person would speak from inside her. When Lorraine walked over to join the group, Lonnie experienced an episode of instantaneous possession and lurched out in an attempt to attack Lorraine. This incident terrified everyone in the vicinity, with the Warrens ending the audience chat session immediately, before Ed escorted the couple to an offstage room while Lorraine stayed outside. In the backstage room, the girl was fully under possession, breathing heavily, and her facial features had transformed into the wolf-like appearance the boy had talked about. After about 10 minutes, the possession passed, and Lonnie was lucid enough to explain, dealing with memory loss, along with losing hours and days of her life over the last 3 months, which is a symptom common in possession. She went on to share that originally her now boyfriend, Alan, had refused all of her advances and bribery attempts at becoming hers, and she had resorted to visiting a store prominent in selling tools to help with witchcraft, purchasing there a book on the black arts, and later that night performing a ritual for acquiring lovers. This ritual involved, you guessed it, the black lace veil, on top of which she placed a crown of goat horns before renouncing God in her baptism, along with swearing allegiance to Satan, finishing the ritual by washing down the vow with a cup of animal scarlet elixir. About a month after Lonnie performed the ritual, Alan began paying her the attention she craved, making her entitled world perfect. What she hadn't counted on, however, was that she was now in debt to the demonic, having given them permission to enter her life. Ed knew immediately that Lonnie would have to undergo an exorcism as soon as possible, and made contact with a priest the next morning, who was able to come assist with the procedure. Upon arrival, the priest insisted on testing the spirit, so he instructed Lonnie to close her eyes and slowly count to 20, while his assistant stood behind her and placed a cross around 6 inches behind her head. The entity possessing the girl suddenly went wild, screaming, "Take it away, it burns! Take it away!" During the exorcism, it kept screaming, "She's mine! She's mine! Her soul is mine!" in reference to Lonnie. It was eventually separated from Lonnie, but just before it departed, the thing vowed it would return to another. The Warrens brought the black lace veil, goat horns, cup, and the Conjuring book home with them so she would be safe from possession, but the tale of the veil doesn't end here. Months later, when Ed was in a meeting with a lady who was manifesting different personalities, some male, some female, and some that couldn't even be called human, but all making extremely threatening statements, her eyes began to wander, and when they landed on the black veil, she jumped up, grabbed the veil, and clutched it to her chest. Her features immediately began to transform into those of a wild, sneering creature distinct from the otherwise attractive girl. Ed drew 2 vials of water to himself, one unblessed, the other blessed by an exorcist, and moved away from what was no longer this woman, but an inhuman spirit, a lesser devil of hell. Horrid moaning and various animal sounds came from the girl as Ed blessed her, banishing the demon away for now a second and final time. And that brings us to the end of our list, and I'm glad all of those items are still kicking around the Warren Museum for safety and not out in the open. In 5th place, we're starting with a lesser known artifact from the Warrens' home. What appears to the innocent eye as nothing but a long black spike, perhaps left over from a construction project of sorts, holds a history of sadness and evil doing. Being the oldest item listed today, its history dates back to its use in the 1700s. While the name of the witch it belonged to has been lost to time, the spike was originally used in a black mass ritual, in an attempt to summon Satan himself to this world. The witch we're speaking of had attempted to curse the stake over the course of her pregnancy, hoping that it would become strong enough to take the soul of her womb in exchange for the devil. During the ritual, she plunged the stake into the flesh as sacrifice, but while it strengthened her relationship with Satan, it did not succeed in bringing him to earth. The stake was passed down as a family heirloom, bringing a feeling of longing and sadness to any that held it, until it was finally acquired by the Warrens. Moving along to 4th place, we're discussing the only item on this list that's made its way to Hollywood: Bathsheba's jewelry box. In January 1971, the Perron family moved into a 14-room farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island, where Carolyn, Roger, and their 5 daughters began to notice strange occurrences almost immediately. It started with events that most of us probably wouldn't even register. Carolyn would notice that the broom went missing or seemed to move from place to place on its own. See, I'd personally be chalking that up to my ADHD. 2 young girls of the home began to notice spirits around the house. Carolyn then brought it upon herself to research the history of the home and discovered that it had been in the same family for 8 generations, and that many of them had passed under mysterious or horrible circumstances. The most haunting spirit in the home is that of the witch, Bathsheba Sherman. Fairly well off, Bathsheba and her husband Judson had a son, Herbert L. Sherman, born when Bathsheba was approximately 37 years old. While the couple gave birth to 3 others, they weren't able to survive past the age of 7. One of the passings of a neighbor's child in her care drew public attention during a post-mortem examination, when it was determined that the fatal wound was caused by a large sewing needle that had been impaled at the base of the skull. It's believed that Bathsheba took offense to Carolyn moving into what she considered her home and wanted to take back that control. The most notable incident being one afternoon when Carolyn said that she had been lying on the sofa and out of nowhere felt a piercing tip of pain in her calf, and then the muscle began to spasm. Upon examination, she noticed a puddle of blood at the point of impact. She checked for bees or anything else that could have caused the puncture in her leg, but found nothing. In her daughter's book, Andrea Perron described the wound as perfectly circle, as if a large sewing needle had impaled her skin. Now, if I were to summarize the entire hell the Perron family endured for the decade that they lived in what they refer to as the Old Arnold Estate, we'd be here for an hour. But during one of the last instances where the Warrens were called in to help the ailing family, they removed the box from the home after thoroughly blessing it, believing that it was acting as a conduit for Bathsheba's demonic energy to affect the home.
Number 3, the Grand Grimoire. That is so fun to say. This next entry has been nicknamed the Gospel of Satan. So if you're looking for an indication as to whether or not this book is, evil, there you go. They had to put that on a sticker, put it on the cover right next to the Oprah's Book Club recommendation. This book is said to have originally been written by a man possessed by the devil sometime in the 16th century. It's an infamous occult text and is said to contain dark incantations, spells and rituals, tools on how to force demons to do one's bidding, and even some instructions for a little necromancy 101 for fledgling dead raisers. It's not all brimstone and hellfire though. There are also reports on how to make pacts with spirits for personal gain, rituals to win the lottery, talk to ghosts, make yourself invisible, and even adorably, how to win love. Never heard of a demon working to help someone fall in love. Now all that sounds cool, definitely. I know I would love to have like a little skeleton minion who could help me with chores, maybe be like my little buddy. I love playing a necromancer in Skyrim, but these things don't really work out if you don't know what you're doing. Take a look at Full Metal Alchemist, that didn't work, they didn't know what they were doing. Even opening this book is considered equivalent to selling your soul to the devil. Soon as you crack the spine, it's like signing the contract. Because of the book's nefarious reputation, the original copy of the manuscript has been sealed away inside the Vatican's secret archives, and not currently available to the public. So I don't think whatever they're listing on Amazon as the Grand Grimoire for $10 is the real Grand Grimoire. Number 2, the Voynich manuscript. The Voynich manuscript has got to be one of my favorite stories of a mysterious manuscript ever. I guess that's why I put it at number 2. Unlike a lot of entries on this list, it's actually very easy to come across a digital copy of the Voynich manuscript. It's available to read online. The only trouble is reading it honestly probably won't do you a lick of good, since it's written in a language no one has ever heard of and there's no record of it ever having existed. Yale University has the entire thing up and available online if you're feeling confident enough that you can take a crack at it and feel like banging your head against a brick wall for a few hours. The book is a handwritten, hand-illustrated codex of 240 pages of pure mystery, featuring gorgeous illustrations and typography, and what the book is about is your guess is as good as mine, honestly. Carbon dating suggests that it stems from the 15th century, and analysis of the style of the text and illustrations within suggests that it could have been penned during the Italian Renaissance. But just about every single aspect of this thing is shrouded in mystery. We don't even know what it's truthfully called. The Voynich manuscript is the name it was given after the initial owner, Wilfrid Voynich, purchased it in 1912 and brought it to public attention for the first time. Sorry, not the first owner, I'm sure several other people owned it before him. As such, the language inside the book is occasionally referred to as Voynichese. Now, some pages are missing, lost to time completely, and the pages we do have are just a puzzle. Some are foldable sheets of various sizes, some pages have wondrously drawn diagrams or illustrations showing things like plants, some fictional, some real, and astrological symbols, drawings of people. Over the years, there have been several efforts to try and decode and document the book and figure out just what it is. A prevailing theory, admittedly a boring one, is that it's a guide to botany written in a mysterious script, a forgotten language, an uncrackable code, an incredibly convoluted hoax. Of course, with any good mystery, there are some wild theories. Some say the Voynich manuscript could be written from an extraterrestrial gifted to humanity, or written in demonic script perhaps, or that biblical language that we were mentioning in the book Gigas a few points ago. Like I said, it's available online, so I leave this up to you. If you manage to crack it, let us know down below in the comments. We're all clamoring for it. And number 1, the Codex Gigas. When it comes to cursed and demonic books, the Codex Gigas is one of the biggest ones around. Like, literally. Codex Gigas translates to giant book, which isn't exactly a scary name. When you see the size of this behemoth, it starts to make a little bit more sense. This thing is massive. 2 feet long. Now, giant, oversized, illuminated manuscripts were pretty common around the area the book was penned, but this one stood out for its immense size and the dark rumors surrounding the supposedly cursed text. Don't even try reading this thing, just lifting it'll give you a hernia. That's the curse. It's occasionally been dubbed Satan's Bible due to the legend surrounding its origin. It's a good story, so get cozy. Supposedly, the legend goes that a monk by the name of Herman the Recluse, which is also what they used to call me, was condemned to death for heresy and was to be walled up alive and starved. In a desperate plea to save himself, Herman tried to convince the prior and the abbot as a whole that if he could pen a manuscript to honor God's glory, and that it would contain all of human knowledge and all of human history in one book, and if he could pen it in one night, he would be let free. The abbot agreed, thinking this was, of course, impossible. Herman wrote until midnight, wearing his fingertips down, and in a moment of desperation, made a prayer to Lucifer and asked for his eternal soul in exchange for the book's completion in order to repent for his sins. I totally get it. You know, I gotta be honest, I have done some pretty nutso stuff trying to make sure my scripts get in time for deadline. Haven't quite sold my soul to the devil yet. I usually just rail Red Bulls, but I'd probably make a similar deal under a similar deadline. Now, I don't want to poke any holes in Herman's logic here, but I will say maybe selling your soul to the devil is part of the reason you got into this mess in the first place, because that does sound a little bit like heresy, but it's not my place to judge. I'm not an archdeacon. A variation of the legend states that Herman worked for years on the manuscript, day and night, but still was unable to complete it in his lifetime and asked for the devil's assistance. Anyway, no matter the story, the legend states that Satan signed the Bible with a particularly terrifying illustration of himself. I mean, take a look at it, it's horrifying looking. The book contains a birth of information. Like they said, it was supposed to be everything humanity had attained up to that point in one big book. These days, the Codex Gigas is preserved in the Natural Museum in Sweden, where you can admire the penmanship of Herman the Recluse and his ghost author, Satan.
And at number 5, the Satanic Idol. This lanky, horned, demonic-looking idol was discovered deep in the Connecticut woods. A lone deer hunter was out there with his bow when he came across it. Apparently, the hunter felt an immediate sense of dread and became frightened, and felt the strength leave his body. Freaked out, he made the decision to flee, walking away from it on a footpath. That's when he spotted a man dressed in all black with a white beard, who came seemingly out of nowhere, who was walking in step across from him, not looking at him at all. The hunter tried asking the mysterious man if he knew the way out of the woods, but the man didn't answer him, with words at least. Instead, he just used his finger to point towards the direction. Many people who have gone to the museum have reported feeling chills when they lay their eyes upon the Satanic Idol, but where exactly it came from originally, who knows. Up next, number 4, the organ. Amongst the collection of satanic objects, demon masks, death curses, and haunted dolls and toys, the Warrens have a much larger haunted item that tends to attract people to their museum. museum, an old organ that reportedly plays all by itself. It's one of the items said to have a spiritual or metaphysical purpose rather than just being strictly haunted or possessed. The organ as an instrument has a long history of association with the horror genre. Often the organ, which is an instrument over 1800 years old, is used in creating bone-chilling music, not just because of how it sounds, but because of its roots in Victorian novels, in which organists would practice playing it at night. Several key publications help perpetuate the idea that the organ was associated with the Gothic or the haunted, including the likes of Phantom of the Opera, which was originally published in 1900. Organ music, including a couple of Bach's symphonies, have been a staple in early horror cinema, including the 1941 Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So all in all, whether the Warrens' organ actually plays itself entirely on its own, or if it's just a well thought out gimmick, their organ definitely helps set the mood amongst all of the other allegedly haunted artifacts that the museum harbors.
Moving on to our third place, we have the Conjuring mirror. Unlike the last artifact on our list, this has nothing to do with the Hollywood franchise. Originally belonging to a 45-year-old New Jersey man named Oliver Birnbaum, it was used to practice a medieval ritual known as speculum, or mirror magic. He performed a lengthy incantation ritual known as a conjuring formula, inviting the spirit world to assist him in manipulating the future. In the beginning, Oliver saw very little in the mirror, other than the movement of blurred forms or quick little incidents that meant nothing to him. But the more he concentrated his attention into the mirror, the more control Oliver gained, and ergo, the more he could see. After performing this ritual obsessively for many months, he got to the point where all he had to do was state what he wanted to see and the desired image would appear, eventually being able to tune into the future whenever he wanted. He gained the ability to project people he didn't like into the mirror, singling them out for punishment or revenge. The unknowing victim would be shown in a future situation, and Oliver would will misfortune to that person, being able to see his justice occur in the mirror just the way he planned it. And while this sounds like a fun projection of one's imagination, these malicious acts would actually be carried out by inhuman spirits. In order to make a victim fall down the stairs, a spirit would either momentarily disorient the person, apport some grease on a step, or go so far as to give the victim a psychokinetic push. Eventually, Oliver neglected the part of the ritual where he had to give homage to Satan, and as a result, the evil he proposed for others began to occur to him, along with the spirits that he turned loose on his enemies now infesting his own home instead. After about a week of torture, this man was so terrified that he called a prominent Catholic official and begged him to send a demonologist to his house. When the Warrens arrived at the address, they met a man frightened out of his wits, and rightfully so. Doors were opening and closing by themselves. Every minute something would crash and break or bounce off a wall and smash. Ed was able to reverse the ritual originally enacted by Oliver and bless the house, stopping the disturbance. As the Warrens were about to depart, Oliver insisted that they take the mirror with them, and the 5-foot-tall antique now lives in their museum. In second place, we have the black lace veil. Now, while I obviously love the idea of a cute gothy aesthetic, this is anything but. After one of their public lectures, Ed was conversing with a couple that had been in the audience, where the boy introduced himself as Alan and explained that he'd brought his girlfriend Lonnie to the lecture because he suspected that she'd been overtaken by some occult influence. He explained that when his girlfriend became angry, her features would change into something resembling a wolf, and then the voice of a different person would speak from inside of her. When Lorraine walked over to join the group, Lonnie experienced an episode of instantaneous possession and lurched out in an attempt to attack Lorraine. This incident terrified everyone in the vicinity, with the Warrens ending the audience chat session immediately, before Ed escorted the couple to an offstage room while Lorraine stayed outside. In the backstage room, the girl was fully under possession, breathing heavily, and her facial features had transformed into the wolf-like appearance the boy had talked about. After about 10 minutes, the possession passed, and Lonnie was lucid enough to explain dealing with memory loss, along with losing hours and days of her life over the last 3 months, a symptom that is common in possession. She went on to share her background. She was a girl wealthy enough to buy whatever she wanted, but money can't always buy love. Originally, her now boyfriend Alan had refused all of her advances and bribery attempts at becoming hers, and she had resorted to visiting a store prominent in selling tools to help with witchcraft, purchasing there a book on the black arts, and later that night performing a ritual for acquiring lovers. This ritual involved, you guessed it, the black lace veil, on top of which she placed a crown of goat horns before renouncing God and her baptism, along with swearing allegiance to Satan, finishing the ritual by washing down the vow with a cup of animal life force. You know, simple stuff. About a month after Lonnie performed the ritual, Alan began paying her the attention she craved, making her entitled world perfect. What she hadn't counted on, however, was that she was in debt to the demonic, having given them permission to enter her life. Ed knew immediately that Lonnie would have to undergo an exorcism as soon as possible and made contact with a priest the next morning, who was able to come and assist with the procedure. Upon arrival, the priest insisted on testing the spirit. He instructed Lonnie to close her eyes and slowly count to 20, while his assistant stood behind her and placed a cross 6 inches behind her head. The entity possessing the girl suddenly went wild, screaming, "Take it away! It burns! Take it away!" During the exorcism, a kept screaming, "She's mine, her soul is mine," in reference to Lonnie. It was eventually separated from Lonnie, but just before it departed, the thing vowed it would return to another. The Warrens brought the black lace veil, goat horns, cup, and the Conjuring book home with them so she would be safe from repossession. But the tale of the veil doesn't end here. Ed received a phone call one day from a man named John Rand, who wanted him to meet his daughter Charlene, who he explained possessed a natural knowledge of what he took to be witchcraft. When she stared at people, even when they weren't aware of it, she'd fill their mind with inhuman terror. John called Ed specifically because Charlene was manifesting different personalities, some male, some female, and some that couldn't even be called human, but all making extremely threatening statements to John and his wife. Upon bringing Charlene to various doctors and clergymen, they recommended John be put in contact with Ed, and Ed agreed to have the girl and her father visit his home the next weekend. When Ed attempted to shake Charlene's hand upon meeting her, she backed away and stared distressfully at him, keeping track of every move he made. His attempts to question her resulted in no-end answers, and her eyes began to wander about the room in boredom. When they landed on the black veil, Charlene jumped up, grabbed the veil, and clutched it to her chest. Her features immediately began to transform into those of a wild, sneering creature distinct from this otherwise attractive girl. Ed drew 2 vials of water to himself, one unblessed, the other blessed by an exorcist, and moved away from what was no longer Charlene, but an inhuman spirit, a lesser devil of hell. Horrid moaning and various animal sounds came from the girl as Ed blessed her, banishing the demon away for now a second time. These items have since been locked away in the museum. And finally, in first place, we have the Ouija board recovered from the Donovan household. 15-year-old Patty Donovan came across the Ouija board and decided to use it to find a friend. From the first yes in response to her queries, Patty was hooked. She spent months falling in love with a spirit she believed to be in love with her, telling it intimacies about her everyday life. After about a year of telling all of her secrets to the board, Patty had become emotionally dependent on the spirit, asking it one night to reveal her future. During the very long session, it laid out a scenario of Patty's life for the next 6 years, providing specific details, right down to the date of the birth of her first child and the fact that she would have a total of 3 children by 1978. All information that would eventually prove true. Being as dependent as she was, on the evening of March 2nd, Patty now pleaded for the spirit to manifest. The next morning, Theodore Donovan found the spark plug wires pulled out of his car, the rubber hoses unfastened, and the fan belt cut out when he was attempting to start his vehicle. Not much later, Patty attempted to start her car. It was discovered later that the internal engine had been completely disassembled. That week, other incidents of apparent vandalism occurred around the Donovan house. Foundation shrubs were yanked out of the ground, roots and all. On the roof, a 6-foot cast iron pipe, which held electrical wires, was found bent at a 90-degree angle. On Friday, March 8th, Ted marked 1 flat on the kitchen calendar. No sooner did Patty get her car back from the shop than one of her other tires lost air. The next day, Saturday, her father made the same entry on the calendar, although this time it seemed the tire had been cut with a knife. In the meantime, Patty could no longer raise her invisible boyfriend on the Ouija board. Night after night, she tried to communicate, but the planchette would simply slide over to goodbye. She had no idea that her ethereal beau had actually manifested in the form of a supernatural vandal. By the second week of March, material damage to the house and cars had become so troublesome that Ted had complained to the police. When they arrived, he pointed out the destruction done to the garden plants and shrubs, the exterior of the house, and the apparent intrusion into a locked garage to puncture the tires and tear engines apart. Before leaving, the policemen assured Ted that they'd keep an eye on the property during night patrols. Later that second week, after work, Ted and his wife Ellen were sitting in the kitchen with their son Brian when all three heard something smash against a wall somewhere inside the house. Cautiously moving to investigate, they found a gaping 18-inch hole in the plasterboard wall in Brian's room. Just as upsetting was the fact that the jagged edges of the plasterboard were pointing inwards, with the blow coming from inside the walls. Listening in the dark that night, Ted heard the sound of a board being pried loose, but after checking the entire house thoroughly, found no loose boards. The house was further plagued by loud noises every night that only escalated in frequency and volume, along with further unexplainable damage to the walls. On April 1st, furniture began to levitate, with a 250-pound dresser flinging its contents while flying erratically. Rocks had also begun to rain from the sky, pelting only the Donovan house, which the police bore witness to. Ted eventually broke down at work and explained the horror of his to his supervisor, who urged him to reach out to the Warrens. Ted instead tried moving his family into a hotel at first, and the spirits followed the family there, destroying the room and making so much noise that the family was thrown out of the hotel and forced to return home. Finally contacting Ed and Lorraine, they arrived in Maine as quickly as they were able to, finding the home in complete disarray. Lorraine said nothing, although at the time she sensed in the home the presence of entities so numerous and threatening that she had to fight with herself to keep from going back outside. After a lengthy tour of the house, Ed and Lorraine conducted an interview with the entire family where Patty's history with the Ouija board was revealed. The Warrens then contacted the Catholic Church to begin the process for an exorcism to be granted, which sadly took a month. The family experienced many more unexplainable horrors during that time. Oh, let me know in the comments if you'd like me to go through their entire story in another video. After the exorcism took place on May 2nd, the family was finally free of the demonic torment, but left with over $5,000 in damages to their home, which would be over $30,000 in today's money.
Number 5. Satanic worship idol. Before we dive into the strange footage of the satanic idol, let's talk about its odd and terrifying backstory. The story of the idol begins in 1991, near Ed and Lorraine's home. There was a lost deer hunter wandering through the area, and after hours of finding no discernible landmarks or ways home, he came face to face with an odd and captivating discovery. In front of him was a large, raised rock formation consisting of circular rocks and a strange being standing in the center of the altar. The hunter, as I believe most of us would be, felt quite uncomfortable and uneasy about this discovery. So he began making his way back to his car, but on his way, he turned to his side and noticed an elderly man with dark eyes dressed in a fully black suit walking in perfect step with him. The two hadn't shared a word, and the hunter became more anxious with each hollow step he took, still not sure of the way out of the woods. The hunter cautiously turned over to the strange man, and with a deep breath he asked, "How do I get out of here?" The strange man lifted up a frail hand and pointed towards a small overgrown path. The hunter turned to see a small pathway and then turned back to the man to thank him, but upon glancing, the man was nowhere to be seen. He disappeared as quickly as he had appeared. The hunter escaped the forest, but was so perplexed and intrigued by the strange encounter that he decided to contact none other than Ed and Lorraine Warren. Now, here's where a new, hardly known fact is revealed. Ed and Lorraine almost always investigated reports armed with a camera to capture any footage that they may have missed and for review. Ed and the hunter located the altar, and in a moment of what can only be described as white audacity, Ed removed the demonic doll from the altar and brought it back to the museum. In the footage, the strange elderly man can be seen lurking in strange corners of the screen, materializing in random positions throughout the footage. The video recording also cuts out frequently, and strange humming noise can be heard along with the glitches. Ed and Lorraine kept the footage under wraps due to the effects that the doll had on Lorraine. And if you'd like to find out more about that reasoning, check out our video on cursed artwork in the Warren Occult Museum. Number 4. Snedeker House. The Warrens are famous for their home investigations of the Perrin family, the Conjuring movie inspiration, and the Amityville home. But there's a less known, very well documented case that the pair also investigated, the Snedeker House. Carmen and Al Snedeker rented a home in Southington, Connecticut, but upon exploring the house, they encountered something that would have scared me out of there faster than light. The pair discovered mortuary tools in their basement, tools that were used in the closed morgue that was in the basement of this house. The home was a funeral parlor. The only time living in a funeral home is acceptable is in My Girl. The couple began smelling rotten flesh, strong chemical odors throughout the house, and the water from the taps would randomly turn a deep red. Their sons were plagued by visions of ghosts and other strange entities. The ghosts became aggressive towards the family, and that's when they decided to call the Warrens for assistance, scared for their lives. The Warrens showed up, filming. They documented several apparitions. Lorraine reported feeling several supernatural entities, all who were filled with vengeance and bouts of pain. The Warrens deduced, within the same visit, that they believed the morticians would participate in horrendous, actually unspeakable acts with the deceased bodies brought into the home. Ed and Lorraine ended their investigation very quickly. In the tape, it's reported that the Snedekers repeatedly asked for sound advice on how to deal with their issue, but sadly, no footage beyond their questioning has been released. The Warrens' advice to the family remains a complete mystery. What do you think their advice would have been?
And at number 3, the Conjuring Mirror. The Conjuring Mirror is an artifact that is used to perform conjuring rituals. Conjuration or evocation is the act of calling upon or summoning a spirit, a demon, a god, or some other sort of supernatural agent. The rituals and practices have roots that date back to the Romans, with conjuring being used as a threat during a siege, or as a way to divert the god's favor from the enemy and onto the Romans. Now these days, Nowadays, contemporary conjuring aligns more so with witchcraft or ceremonial magic by a variety of techniques. When the ritual is done properly and the spirits are summoned, the spirits are supposed to appear on the mirror's surface through a form of crystallomancy or crystal gazing. According to those at the museum, since there is no way to control whether the spirits that are summoned are going to be good spirits or evil spirits, communication through devices such as the mirror are considered incredibly dangerous. So if you go, maybe don't try it out. Just a thought. In at number 2, the Shadow Doll. The Shadow Doll is one creepy looking fella, and according to the Warrens, it's a vessel to inflict pain on unsuspecting victims. Draped in black with a pale face accented in blue, the Shadow Doll is apparently capable of appearing in your dreams and stopping one's heart. According to Ed Warren, who calls it the Doll of Shadows, it was made through black magic rituals, created for evil purposes, crafted out of human bones and animal parts, including nails, teeth, and crow's feathers. It works in a unique way too. Essentially, you take a photograph of the doll and send it to someone with a specific curse written on the back of that photo. Once the person that you've targeted looks at the photograph of the doll, the image of it can telepathically be projected to them in a dream state, allowing for it to visit them in a nightmare. Apparently, these images within people's dreams have been so powerful at times that they've stopped their hearts while they were sleeping. Now, destroying the doll is only said to have greater horrific consequences, since it will release the spirits that are trapped within it. So how did Ed and Lorraine get their hands on it? Well, a couple who had purchased it from an antique dealer brought it to them after experiencing the same horrible nightmare featuring the doll night and night again, and waking up with scratch marks all over their bodies. The following night after it first happened, claw marks started to appear on their bodies, which is when they called up the Warrens. According to the Warrens in a press release, the doll's sole purpose is to wreak havoc upon innocent human beings. And finally, in at number 1, the Annabelle doll. The most famous piece of the Warrens' collection at their museum is without a doubt the Annabelle doll. It was locked up inside of a glass case with a sign in front of it that reads, "Warning, positively do not touch." While it may look like a regular old rag doll, the story behind it is by far more sinister. In 1970, a woman bought a Raggedy Ann-esque doll for her daughter at a thrift shop. Her daughter, Donna, who was in college at the time, liked it and brought it home to her apartment. But soon afterwards, her roommate Angie and her started to notice strange happenings, all of which revolved around the doll. The doll would move by itself. It would appear in rooms other than the one that it was left in. Small pieces of paper with childish writing began to appear in the apartment that read things like "Help us" and "Help Lou," who was one of their male friends. And one day they found the doll standing up on its own. Freaked out, they contacted a medium, who told them that the doll was supposed to be possessed by a little girl who had died in their apartment building a long time ago, named Annabelle. The doll told the medium that she liked Donna and Angie, and wanted to stay with them, asking for their permission. The girl said yes, but by doing so, this allowed for more paranormal activity to occur, including a male friend being physically attacked by the doll one evening, leaving burn marks on his skin and causing him to bleed. That's when Ed and Lorraine were contacted, who discovered that rather than it being possessed by the spirit of a child, the doll was being manipulated by a demon who wanted to get closer to them, with the intention of possessing one of them. So they gave Annabelle to the Warrens, who now keep it in their museum. And at number 5, Shrunken Heads. One of the most disturbing and fascinating collections that the Warrens have for their museum are their shrunken heads. Often used for voodoo rituals, they claim that many of these heads have been defiled by evil. Shrunken heads, for those of you who don't know, are severed human heads that have been prepared in a particular way to be used for rituals, trophies, or for trade purposes, often associated with the act of headhunting in regions of the world like the Amazon rainforest with various indigenous tribes. They're also used as a means of scaring off enemies. Which, yeah, totally understand how that works. Would not go anywhere near that. And at number 4, a vampire coffin. While vampires are often portrayed as sex symbols in movies and books, vampires in real life, if they do exist, are allegedly much more dangerous. I can imagine why. Inside the museum, the Warrens have a coffin that is said to have been used by a real-life modern-day vampire. On its front, there's a gothic design, and a photograph of Ed taken upon retrieving the coffin. So, what do you guys think? Is there a chance that vampires really exist? Or are they just a fantasy? There have been cases throughout history of humans drinking blood, claiming that the act is life-sustaining, but whether or not their anatomy is that of what a vampire is supposed to be is actually yet to be scientifically proven. Who knows? Maybe the Warrens have stumbled upon something interesting. And at 3, masks. The Warrens have a variety of strange and obscure masks in their collection from all over the globe, including parts of Africa. They've researched over 3,500 cases, so naturally they've come into contact with many a mask with nefarious origins. One mask was used as a tulpa for diabolical protection. There are voodoo masks accompanied by ritualistic objects. Others have been possessed, and when someone puts on the mask, they risk becoming possessed themselves. Other masks have previously been possessed and no longer are, but are kept at the museum for safekeeping. Typically, the Warrens keep objects that are still possessed or have risk of harming humans locked within glass cases. So fear not, friends. Although, safety first. Maybe don't try to put on one of their masks. I also imagine it would not smell good. And at number 2, psychic photographs. Psychic photographs, according to Ed Warren, are a fascinating phenomenon in which a camera manages to capture the electromagnetic energy of a spirit, capturing either just the energy source or the apparition which depicts the ghost's spirit. In other words, they're photographs that have ghosts in them. According to Ed, I quote, "The camera is an impartial witness. It takes a picture of what it sees. It's not something that's made up. There are many ways that pictures of ghosts can be taken." He goes on to say that a ghost can actually project its image onto the camera's film by thinking of what it looks like by projecting it telepathically. They bypass your physical eye and go into your mind's eye, or your third eye. Now, some of these photographs are defiled by evil according to the Warrens. They also have other photographs featured at the museum too, depicting heinous acts of Satanism. And for the most part, none of these photographs came in a time when Photoshop actually existed, so who knows? And finally, at number 1, children's tombstones. Outside of the Warren Museum, you can stamp a photo of yourself with a collection of tiny tombstones. Now, these tombstones, all of which previously belonged to deceased children, are said to have been used as satanic altars in various rituals. Now, throughout history, tombstones have been used as part of rituals in a practice that is often referred to as satanic ritual abuse, and was considered a subject of moral panic in the US during the 1980s that spread throughout parts of the world in the 90s. It was often associated with individuals who had dissociative identity disorder. It was also the focus of conspiracy theories in which SRA organizations, whose members were allegedly wealthy and powerful individuals, would abduct children and use them for sacrifices, as well as pornography and prostitution. It's not the only item that has ties to young children at the museum either. The Warrens also have a spike that was used to kill a baby by its own mother as a sacrifice to the devil in an act of Satanism. Ugh, creepy stuff.
In at 5, brick from Borley Rectory. Labelled as the most haunted house in Britain, Borley Rectory was built in 1862. It housed the rector of the parish of Borley before being damaged by a fire and later demolished in 1944. However, between those periods, paranormal events began to occur at the old rectory. Beginning in 1863, only a year after the house was built, locals of the town had reported hearing unexplained footsteps coming from the house. And then in 1990, 4 daughters reported seeing the ghost of a nun 40 yards from the house. Other locals had also reported strange occurrences such as phantom carriages being driven by headless horsemen. By the 1930s, a new set of residents were occupying the house and were driven to hire paranormal investigators to perform exorcisms, during which time one of the men was struck by a fist-sized stone. Ouch. In 1939, the fire was deliberately set ablaze and locals had reported that they saw the figure of a ghostly nun not long before it happened. With the history of the house, it's no surprise the Warrens are holding onto one of the surviving bricks in order to conceal the spirits trapped within. In at 4, human skulls. This is the first of a few on our list to be collected from a satanic practice, and the picture is eerie and very unnerving. The human skull has a star on the forehead and is situated on a shelf on top of a miniature throne-esque stand. I say this because the Warrens haven't gone into too much detail about the history of the skull or the satanic practice it was used in. Likely it was a host, to draw in a demonic entity or the devil itself. Many satanic rituals regarding devil worshipping made use of murder and cannibalism in their rituals. However, at the end of the 20th century, hysteria surrounding satanic rituals died down and summed up as a myth. Even FBI investigator Ken Lanning stated that he had investigated 300 allegations of satanic ritual abuse and found no evidence for Satanism or ritualistic activity in any of them. I don't know though, we live in a world devoted to the macabre, and I'm sure there are folks out there partaking in rituals like these. What do you guys think? In at 3, Ouija board. As we know, Ouija boards, also known as spirit boards or talking boards, were introduced by Hasbro as a child's game, each player taking turns to ask questions and waiting to see what the planchette spells out. Innocent enough, right? Well, we all know that's not the case. The Catholic Church were the first to point out the game can lead to occurrences such as demonic possession, you know, the usual, and advised inexperienced users to not mess with it. In 2001, Ouija boards were even burned in New Mexico by fundamentalist groups because they believed them to be symbols of witchcraft. But don't fret, they also burned Harry Potter books, so I'm not sure their heads were screwed on quite right. Regardless of everything, it's arguably pop culture that heightened the fear around the game, with films such as The Uninvited, The Exorcist, and Paranormal Activity all including the game, and violent entities communicating with it. Now, the Warrens of course have their own Ouija board in their occult museum. There isn't much information about its history or where they took it from, but I'm sure it's pretty damn creepy. In at number 2, African fertility dolls. Akuaba are wooden fertility dolls from Ghana and surrounding areas. They are primarily used in ritualistic ceremonies and carried on the backs of women hoping to conceive a child. In present day, they are more of a souvenir than a ritual device, but traditional users will still wash and care for the wooden doll in hopes of one day bearing a child. Like our previous number, there is not much information about the dolls in the museum, but I imagine they are storing some hefty secrets. I mean, take a look at this picture. And finally, in at number 1, masks used to project evil entities. As we now know, many of the items at the Occult Museum were collected from witchcraft rituals and voodoo ceremonies, and this one is no different. It's a handmade Sri Lankan mask comprised of evil spirits, and primarily used in ritualistic ceremonies to invoke the supernatural. This is usually presented through practices such as mime, facial and body painting, and are connected to the worship of their ancestors. There are a handful of demon dance ceremonies, some with the belief in monsters of gigantic proportions known as the demons of the graveyard, and others that are just associated with a group of demons. Either way, these ritualistic masks are used to summon demonic entities, and the history this mask holds is dark and unnatural.
In 5th place, we have a cursed wallet. So this tale begins in October of 1972 when an officer at the United States Military Academy contacted the Warrens a day before they were scheduled to present a lecture to the cadets there, informing them that a curious security problem had arisen and could they possibly help? Now obviously they said yes, or else we wouldn't be talking right now. So the next day at a little past 4 in the afternoon, they entered the gates of the academy and were escorted to the office of Major Donald Wilson. So the Major went on to explain how an unaccountable breach of security was occurring in the home of West Point's commanding general. Ed asked the Major if he knew the nature of the problem, to which the man replied that there was a ghost in the general's quarters. So the Warrens were soon escorted to meet the general and his wife, where they were directed into a sitting room, where the general explained that, well, nothing macabre had happened. A number of curious incidents had occurred without any kind of explanation. So, some background, in the basement of that building there is a private study that at the time was kept locked and secure, but no matter how many times the bunk in there was made up, it was always found ripped apart later. Upstairs, ghosts had been seen flitting about the house. Oh, and personal belongings and other important articles were regularly found missing. The man emphasized not stolen, but just missing temporarily. Later, all these stolen items would be found upstairs, neatly laid out on the dresser in the general's bedroom. So he asked Ed if this could be, caused by a ghost, and Ed confirmed that it was indeed a possibility, and probably like a human ghosty and not a demonic spirit. Lorraine offered to walk throughout the home to try and, establish where the spirit might be present, while Ed and Major Wilson headed for the basement with the key to the downstairs study. As usual, the bunk was torn apart as though someone had been sleeping in it, while nothing else was disturbed. So while Lorraine did her walk through the house, she picked up impressions of the powerful individuals who had spent time in the home in many years over the years, but hardly any sense of a mischievous spirit. She offered to enter a trance state later that evening, after the presentation, to attempt to contact the spirit, and the group, was like, alright, you do you, let's try this. So much later that night, after the events of the day, the group made its way upstairs to the MacArthur bedroom. All lights were turned off but one, and Lorraine closed her eyes. She described seeing a black man wearing a dark uniform with no markings, who was overtaken with a sense of fear, guilt, and lack of acceptance. He told her that he'd been accused of killing, and his cell was in the basement, but the army had exonerated him of that crime. He was very sorry, and could not hold his sorrow any longer. He told her that his name was Greer, and spelled it out clearly for Lorraine, and she was able to convince him to pass over into the light. So after she exited her trance, Lorraine gave a complete description of the man and said at the end that he had simply vanished, and mentioned that he had left his wallet in that downstairs bunker. So the general was adamant that based on the uniform Lorraine had described, no black men had served at West Point during that time. But, he mentioned he would look into it and thank the Warrens for their time. Goodbye, alright, sure. A few weeks later though, Ed and Lorraine received a phone call from the general. It was discovered that a black man, a porter by the name of, Greer, had served there. So he had been assigned to the Thayer mansion in the early 19th century, and he'd been accused of committing death, but the army did exonerate him of it. His records had been out of order, and he would now be officially filed as deceased. Also, the walls in the bunker had been renovated, and the wallet was finally found. What do you know? The army offered to mail it to the Warrens just to be safe, and it has stayed in their museum ever since. In 4th place, we have the Snedeker family rosary beads. And as you might expect, this true story begins in the witching hour, in the wee small hours of the morning. Because if rosary beads aren't scary enough. One night, very late at night, Ed and Lorraine were contacted by this family who had just moved into a house on Meriden Avenue in Southington. Specifically, the mother of the family unit and a niece who came to stay with the family were on the phone. And, So originally what they found and bought was a big and seemingly welcoming home. But what they didn't know when they bought it was that it was a former funeral home. Oh, and fun fact, the morticians at the funeral home were allegedly involved in necrophilia, or performing sex acts with corpses. And what used to be the showroom for the coffins was now where the younglings were. And just down the hall from that was the place where the bodies were prepared for viewing. Yeah, not grim at all. So the boys were the first to start talking about things they had seen and experienced, saying they were absolutely terrified, and the parents, chastised them at first for it. But the boys were so scared they started sleeping on the floor in the living room. Among the sounds they would hear were the sound of chains pulling the coffins upstairs. And there were no more coffins in the house. So the woman who called the Warrens were terrified, with the niece in a small bedroom in the back of the house, and the covers on her bed were levitating around her like there was a fan blowing them around. Lorraine said while the mother was on the phone with her, even more bizarre events started happening. So remember those rosary beads? Yeah, she had them in her hand, and while she was speaking, the beads were actually being pulled apart and falling to the floor. Lorraine and Ed went over the next morning with the family's parish priest, and a blessing the house seemed to do absolutely nothing to calm things down. And that's when the Warrens decided to call the bishop's office. So the church eventually sent an exorcist, which seemed to sort of do the trick, but not before one last hurrah from whatever the heck was believed to be haunting the house, because demons don't like to give up without a fight. There was this huge tree in front of the house, and half the tree, with no wind, broke off and fell on the property. The family moved the heck out of Dodge a short time later, and Ed and Lorraine kept the rosary beads that had been pulled apart, because if a demonic spirit can touch a Catholic relic, that means it's been infested with something absolutely awful, and they didn't want to risk the beads spreading throughout the world and causing even more damage. Yeah, that makes sense.
Number 3, the black lace veil. Right in the middle, we're going to talk about an event that had many eyewitnesses and was likely captured in some degree by recording equipment. Following one of their public lectures, Ed and Lorraine Warren were approached by a young couple, Alan and Lonnie. Alan had brought Lonnie to the lecture because he suspected that she was under the influence of the occult. He described a disturbance. When Lonnie became angry, her features would morph and transform into a creature resembling a wolf, and an entirely different voice would emerge from her. Just as Lorraine joined the conversation, a shocking incident unfolded. Lonnie experienced an instantaneous possession and lunged aggressively at Lorraine, utterly terrifying everyone present in the room. Ed swiftly escorted the couple to a backstage room where Lonnie was fully under possession, her face distorted into the aforementioned wolf-like appearance. After about 10 minutes, the possession subsided, and Lonnie revealed her disturbing experiences of memory loss and losing time over the past few months, which, as you know, are all very common symptoms of possession. Lonnie confessed that she had resorted to witchcraft after failing to win Alan's affections. She performed a ritual that involved a black lace veil and a crown of goat horns, renouncing her faith and swearing allegiance to Satan. In a month, Alan began showing interest, but the demonic entity had gained entrance into her life. Ed knew that Lonnie needed an exorcism and contacted a priest who arrived the same day. During the exorcism, the entity within Lonnie screamed in protest, but was eventually separated from her, vowing to return to another. The Warrens took the black lace veil, goat horns, cup, and conjuring book for safekeeping to prevent repossession. However, the story of the veil didn't end there. Months later, during a meeting with another woman who manifested multiple personalities and inhuman entities, her gaze landed on the black veil. She clutched it, her features transformed, and she became an inhuman spirit. Ed, armed with blessed water, banished the demon a second and final time. Both of these events are said to have been captured on a tape recorder, as the Warrens frequently recorded their lectures. Number 2, the haunted pearl necklace. The haunted pearl necklace is also referred to as the pearls of death. This jewelry's effects are pretty obvious. The necklace is known as one of the most dangerous items within the Warrens Occult Museum, so yeah, it's living up to its name already. The Pearls of Death is a cursed necklace that has a curse or entity residing in it, causing anyone who wears it to be strangled, and in some cases even strangled so brutally that their lives are ended. Yeah. Death by a necklace. I'm starting to rethink my stance on that gorgeous blue diamond necklace. If you know, you know. It's an inside joke. Only my faves know what I'm talking about. One of their former owners commonly reported being choked while wearing them, even waking up with red marks on her neck after sleeping in them. The pearls are also extremely difficult to remove. Well, they're difficult to remove from the living. Ed and Lorraine Warren kept these pearls heavily guarded and surveyed, and if you're like me, the word surveyed raises excited alarm bells. That's right. right. Within the museum, several security cameras are placed, which not only protect the artifacts, but also monitor any strange activity. In one surveillance clip, which was privately distributed by an anonymous source who had regular access to the museum, revealed a myriad of strange activities surrounding the pearls. The video captures the pearls vibrating ever so slightly before a small light emanates from them, and a dark shadow quickly shifts towards the ground, as though it was water flowing out of the pearls. These events repeated night after night, typically around 4:24 a.m., with the effects being weaker the further away they get from the stated time. Whether Ed and Lorraine were aware of the footage being leaked to a select group of people, they never addressed it. They didn't even deny it. I suppose they figured ignoring the footage completely would decrease the interest in it, and hey, they were right. I'd never heard of it until now. Number 1. White Lady of Union Cemetery. You guys know how I feel about the naming. Come on, be more creative. The White Lady? Guys, just please try a little bit harder. Anyway, the White Lady is the name of the ghost that haunts the Union Cemetery in Connecticut. The legend surrounding her origin varies, but there are several points that consistently align to create an accurate backstory. She's thought to be the ghost of Harriet Seeley, who searches for her deceased son throughout the graveyard. It is also widely agreed that she wears a bright orange dress. Now, I'm kidding. Obviously, she wears a white dress, and you bet your bottom dollar it's a flowy one. The ghost was often seen by locals. She frequently spooked the citizens of the surrounding area, jumping in front of cars, appearing in their periphery, and then disappearing. Ed Warren was heavily interested in this apparition, so he set out on a quest to record this ghost for himself. Yes, for himself. As I said, they don't enjoy sharing their findings. Maybe the ghosts value privacy and Ed signed an NDA or something, I don't know. But the NDA didn't apply to the pair's son-in-law, Tony Spera, because shortly after their passing, he released the full footage. The footage begins by panning over a darkened cemetery, and there's definitely a heavy air surrounding the entirety of the footage. While panning over the rows of graves, a glowing human figure wearing a long white dress was spotted moving behind a tombstone, like it was playing hide and go seek. No close-up shots of the spirit were caught, and the camera wasn't very good, so any distinct details that the ghost may have remain a mystery. The video was reviewed by skeptics, and it was actually widely agreed that the footage was not doctored in any way. But not only that, the figure seen was not just an illusion or a filming trick. The being is in fact there. Ed Warren did manage to capture evidence of a ghost on camera, which is pretty amazing. Even though I'm not obsessed with him as a person, his career and accomplishments are right up my alley.
In 5th place, we have a satanic idol. This story began in 1991 when a deer hunter was walking through the woods in Connecticut, close to where Ed and Lorraine resided. The hunter got lost and after some time stumbled upon a raised, circular rock formation with the idol in question standing in the middle of it. It is believed that the formation was common with folks who practiced devil worship in the 70s. The hunter began to feel uncomfortable and left the area, deciding to make his way back to his car, and along the way he noticed an elderly gentleman walking alongside him who was dressed in head-to-toe black. The man in black never spoke a single word to the deer hunter. Now the hunter was getting more nervous by the second, and also more lost and unsure of his directional path. Desperate, he turned to the mysterious figure and simply asked, "How do I get out of here?" Luckily for our narrator, the man in black pointed in a direction and then disappeared. The hunter was so thrown off by that day that he reached out to Ed, who requested to be brought to the same area. Now the hunter wasn't 100% sure he could find the exact location, but was willing to try. Together, the two men were able to stumble through the forest, and without the aid of the man in black this time, found the rock form. Ed removed the demonic idol from the area and placed it in the museum, and that's when things got a little weirder. Approximately 3 days after removing the idol, Lorraine collapsed for no known reason, and she was transported to the hospital where no one could identify what was wrong with her. Thankfully, after 3 more days, she recovered. Now Ed believed that this was caused by the gentleman in black, who was believed to have been a high priest in a satanic cult, as a form of payback for removing the satanic idol. In 4th place, we have a Conjuring book. So one night, after returning home from a night out with Ed, Lorraine was reviewing the calls left on the answering machine when she found one from a distraught woman who introduced herself as a Mrs. Sandy Foster, who nervously described a very distressing situation and begged the Warrens to return her call. So even though it was like 12:40 in the morning, Lorraine immediately tried to call her back, and while the phone rang continuously, the connection was broken. Lorraine tried a few more times, going so far as to contact the phone operator and the operator's supervisor, who ran tests on the phone line and frustratingly didn't find anything weird. The next day, when the Warrens returned home from church, Lorraine immediately phoned the Foster home again. This time, Mrs. Foster answered the phone on the second ring and mentioned that the phone had never rang the night before, and Lorraine made the decision to go pay the Fosters a visit that afternoon. She and Ed arrived at around 2 p.m. and met not only Mrs. Foster and her husband, but also their 3 offspring, Abby, Joel, and Hannah, who had experienced most of the phenomena. Ed arranged his recording gear on a a nearby table while Lorraine asked her permission to walk the house, which she was immediately granted. Mrs. Foster brought up that her daughter Meg, the three offspring, Abby, Joel, and Meg, who had experienced most of the phenomena. Ed arranged his recording gear on a nearby table while Lorraine asked her permission to walk the house, which she was immediately granted. Mrs. Foster brought up that her daughter Meg had always been interested in the occult and had purchased a book on Conjuring as a gift for Meg, and based off of the description Ed gave of it, I believe it was a copy of the Ars Goetia. Now Meg admitted to attempting to summon a few of the spirits in the book, but had lost hope because nothing had happened. Ed prompted further, asking for specifics on the experiences that had happened in the last week when only the younglings were home. So, let's set the scene. The boys were already in bed, and Meg had just taken a shower. After going downstairs to make sure the doors were locked and, the lights were off, Meg returned upstairs to the sounds of running water, and the faucets had turned back on without any human's touch. Now downstairs, the lights and the radio had turned back on as well. Meg went downstairs and watched the radio dial moving on its own. After turning it off again, she got halfway up the stairs when she felt an icy cold hand touch her on the shoulder, just for a second in the dark. Now Meg bolted up the rest of the stairs, into her room, shut the door, turned off the lights, and hid under her covers. Outside the door, sounds of heavy footsteps caused her to suddenly shake under her covers. And then, more noises joined in with the mysterious steps. A door downstairs slammed shut, accompanied by furniture being pushed around and crashing, almost as if an angry person had broken into remodel. When Meg was able to open her eyes again, she saw a silver light come out of the woods and glide into her room. The next thing she knew, some hand yanked her hair 3 times. Each time it pulled harder, until the third time it made her eyes water. Now, she ran into her brother's room for safety, and he confirmed that he was also terrified by hearing the assorted unknown noises, accompanied by loud whispering he could not make out. The duo eventually gathered enough courage to call their parents at the home they were at, but by the time the adults returned, all of the paranormal action had paused, and they were convinced the offspring were making it up. On the second occasion, everything that happened was almost the same as the first, but this time they involved the family dog, who was snarling at something that no one could see. Now, Joel remembered it as strange because the dog was deaf and could barely hear noise. So when the wards were hiding in a bedroom on this occasion, instead of a silver figure, they saw a dark purplish cloud that they were unable to look at directly. So Lorraine at this point had returned and reported that she had experienced an inhuman presence throughout the home and asked Meg if she possessed, black conjuring candles in her room. And when she responded yes, Ed told the family that he and Lorraine can handle everything, but they should maybe head out for a drive while it was happening, for safety. Ed and Lorraine got to work the moment the Fosters left, determined to discover the true nature of the spirit's presence in order to dispel it. For provocation purposes, Ed used a crucifix and holy water, scattering the water at all 4 points of the cellar floor, and saying aloud, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command all spirits, whether human or diabolical, to leave this dwelling and never return." On the first floor, Ed repeated the same procedure in each of the rooms. This process, known to any exorcist as binding, requires the infesting spirit to either show itself or move on. Having bound the cellar and all downstairs room without incident, the Warrens were ready to approach the second floor, where they knew difficulty was lurking. But as they prepared to act, a telepathically projected feeling of dread came over them, which is a distinct indication of an inhuman demonic presence. They pressed on and began climbing the staircase to the second floor. But as hard as they tried, neither Ed nor Lorraine could get any more than halfway up. Pushing against them was some impenetrable, unyielding force. So slowly, the Warrens backed down the stairs so as not to be knocked over backwards. And at the bottom of the stairs, for a brief second, diabolical laughter rang out. So, annoyed, Ed threw more holy water on the stairs, which caused the pressure to diminish enough to let them reach the top. They were able to bind almost all the rooms without incident, saving Meg's for last. Ed swung the door wide open, and he and Lorraine immediately felt the need to take a step back from the horrible sense of misery emanating from the room. With a steely composure, Ed walked into the room, cross in hand. Though no physical presence was there to be seen, the bedroom was freezing cold. One last time, Ed threw holy water in all 4 corners of the room, commanding, "Give us some sign of departure or an exorcism will be conducted here this very day." Almost instantly, the morbid sense of misery began to drain away, and the temperature in the room gradually returned to normal. So Meg's bedroom did contain those black conjuring candles, occult vestments, and books containing the rites for rituals of all sorts. Ed placed the items in the gal's trash basket, set them out in the hallway, and then sealed the room by reading a prescribed prayer of sanctification. He brought them back to his home for safekeeping, and that's one copy of the Ars Goetia I have no need to read. Thank you. See? I've told y'all, don't summon beings. In third place, we have a long black spike. So what appears to the innocent eye is like nothing but like a fence stake, perhaps left over from a construction project of sorts, actually holds a history of sadness and evildoing. Being the oldest item listed today, its history dates back to its use in like the 1700s. While the name of the witch it belonged to has been lost to time, the spike was originally used in a black mass ritual in an attempt to summon Satan himself to this world. The witch we're speaking of had attempted to curse the stake over the course of her pregnancy, hoping that it would become strong enough to take the soul of her womb in exchange for the devil. During the ritual, she plunged the stake into the flesh as sacrifice, but while it strengthened her relationship with Satan, it did not succeed in bringing him to earth. The stake was passed down as a family heirloom, bringing a feeling of longing and sadness to any that held it until it was finally acquired by the Warrens. Knowing that the museum is technically closed, I worry if any vandals break in, the damage they could do with something that looks so unassuming, but it's so dangerous. In second place, we have the Carlson's knickknacks. So, this happily married couple in their 30s bought this old inn in New England. No big. So, Nathan Carlson traveled a lot during the week, but his wife, Alexandra, was home all the time to take care of their 2 daughters. Not long after moving in, Mrs. Carlson and her daughter began hearing footsteps on the second floor where, in the past, lodgers used to stay. During the afternoon and late into the night, they'd hear dragging, heavy-booted footsteps move across the floor above them. Mrs. Carlson's older sister, who lived nearby, occasionally stayed overnight in the house and also heard these footsteps. The Carlsons had rooms set aside elsewhere in the house for, live-in farm help, and these men would hear the footsteps walking in circles around their bed. Sometimes, while Mrs. Carlson would be asleep at night, she'd be awakened by the spirits in the home, which would actually yank the covers off the bed while she was, in it. She later found out that very same thing happened to the farm help, which explained why the men tended to, quit so soon after they were hired. Eventually, the infestation phenomena upgraded into whisperings that could be heard behind closed doors. However, when Mrs. Carlson or her older sister checked the room where the whisperings were coming from, there was never anyone present. Although these spirits projected words that were often audible enough to be heard, the woman could never quite identify the language that was being used. And as time went on, the harassment continued. After the missus would straighten up the house, knickknacks and other little items would never be quite where she left them. Outside the house at night, lights would be seen in the attic, although there was no electricity up there. While painting a room one day, the heat was suddenly drawn away, and Mrs. Carlson felt a hand touch her shoulder. She said she became so angry that she threw the paintbrush in the direction where she believed the entity to be, and told it out loud, "I don't know who you are or what you want, but you're not gonna get me." Oh yeah, real smart. So this phenomenon went on almost daily, since this infestation had occurred in the house a long time ago. Exact date unknown. Both the kitchen and the bathroom water faucets would suddenly turn themselves on, full force at the same time. And on occasion, Mrs. Carlson would hear 3 knocks at the front door, which, that's a sign of an inhuman presence. But whenever she'd go to the door, there would be nobody there. On the second floor, a visitor reported seeing a snake on the window ledge after hearing 3 taps on the window, yet there was no nearby tree the reptile could have climbed. Ew, snakes, nope. Oh, it gets worse. While living in the house, the Carlsons had another spawn. And one night, while the missus was watching television in the living room, she suddenly heard a tremendous, powerful explosion. When she jumped up to check, thinking the furnace had kaboomed, she found the door to the infant's room violently torn open. Objects were still swinging and vibrating, and the temperature in the nursery was equal to a meat locker. Although the spirits in the home had evidently tried to kill the youngling, the little one managed to live through the experience. Thank goodness. However, when the spawn reached 3 years of age, Mrs. Carlson was walking past him as he played with some knickknacks from the living room, when he suddenly let go with a loud shriek saying, "You stepped on Beatrice!" So Mrs. Carlson put down the laundry she'd been carrying and asked, "Who?" To which he responded that Beatrice was his friend who told him what to do. Mrs. Carlson then told her son to ask Beatrice who she was, and after a pause he replied that Beatrice had told him to tell her that she's a witch. So the mom took away the items the boy was playing with and almost sent him into hysterics in the process. She tossed him into a basket in her bedroom closet, somewhere the boy was forbidden to go without her permission, and didn't really think about it until later that night when she was in bed by herself and saw a large black form in the room with her. She described the entity as being, blacker than the blackest night, moving slowly around the room, freezing her with fright. I swear I'm not a poet. Before the black mask went away, it transmuted into a globe of synthetic light about the size of a basketball, while producing a deafening roar, which she compared to a blasted furnace. This went on for many nights until the Warrens were called in, and like many other times I've mentioned today, took a tour of the home, blessed it, and realized the knickknacks were directly tied to the entity. Now, they've never described them in detail, so I don't have any clear photos to discuss today, but I'm assuming they're around the size of action figures if a 3-year-old was able to play with them. In first place, we have Bathsheba's jewelry box. So this is probably the most famous case on today's list. In January of 1971, the Perron family moved into a 14-room farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island, where Carolyn, Roger, and their 5 daughters began to notice strange occurrences almost immediately. So this started with events that most of us probably wouldn't even register. Carolyn would notice that the broom went missing or seemed to move from place to place on its own, and the young girls of the home began to notice spirits around the house. Carolyn then brought it upon herself to research the history of the home and discovered that it had been in the same family for 8 generations, and that many of them had passed under mysterious or horrible circumstances. The most haunting spirit of the home is that of witch Bathsheba Sherman. Being fairly well off, Bathsheba and her husband Judson had a son. Herbert, born when Bathsheba was about 37 years old. And while the couple gave birth to 3 others, they were unable to survive past the age of 7. One of the passings of a neighbor's ward in her care drew public attention during a post-mortem examination, when it was determined that the fatal wound was caused by a large sewing needle that had been impaled at the base of the skull. It's believed Bathsheba took offense to Carolyn moving into what she considered her home and wanted to take back that control. So the most notable incident overall was one afternoon when Carolyn said that she had been lying on the sofa and out of nowhere felt a piercing type of pain in her calf, and then the muscle began to spasm. And upon examination, she noticed a puddle of redness at the point of impact. She checked for bees or anything else that could have caused the puncture in her leg, but found nothing. In her daughter's book, Andrea Perron describes the wound as perfectly circular, as if a large sewing needle had impaled her skin. Now, if I were to summarize the entire hell the Perron family endured for the decade they lived in what they referred to as the Old Arnold Estate, we'd be here for an hour. But during one of the last instances, the Warrens were called in to help the ailing family, and they removed a box from the home after thoroughly blessing it, believing that it was acting as a conduit for Bathsheba's demonic energy to affect the home, this being the jewelry box.